What's up, witches? Welcome back to another episode of the BetterWitch podcast, where we have candid conversations with real life practitioners and professionals because when we know better, we witch better. We're broadcasting live from Witchwork, New York City's only co working space for witches. I'm your host, Ali Kravitz, aka Bronx Witch, and I'm the founder of Witchwork and the CEO of Better Witch Coaching. And you can tune in to live tapings of this show from my YouTube channel, Better Witch Coaching and Podcast. Today's guest co host is Lynsey Ayala Rinaldi. Lynsey is the creator and educator behind Bread and Butter, a Bronx born New Yorican working in spiritual herbalism, holistic healing, and sacred earth medicine. Following her family's lineage in curanderismo, her practice is deeply rooted in her Puerto Rican heritage and New York City upbringing. Through workshops and one on one sessions, she helps others reconnect with nature and heal through entheogenic and sacred plant allies. Since 2010, Lynsey has carved a niche in the cannabis and psychedelic community, sharing education on farming, ceremonies, and sacred plant medicines. She has spent decades studying shamanic plant medicine, energy healing, and botanical herbalism, traveling across New York City, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, the Amazon, and California to learn from master teachers. Now pivoting from bread and butter into Yabisi, she is tending more deeply to her ancestral roots, indigenous medicine making, and land stewardship, bringing her wisdom full circle. You can connect with Lynsey at yabisi.com. That's YABISI.com. Welcome, Lynsey. It's so great to see you.
It's so nice to see you. Thank you for that intro.
Yes, it is so wonderful to have you. Reading your intro is really powerful. Sometimes I take creative liberties and cut them down and things like that. But in this case, I was like, no, I have to read all of this because, um, and like with many spiritual practitioners, there are layers to what it is
hmm
do, and then we add in the entrepreneurial component and the business
Right.
that you've built around what you do in order to allow you to serve your community. And there are so many levels of influence in both your practice and in your business. So we really had to get
hmm
into all of it, and we're going to touch on a lot of it here today. Um, and starting off with bread and butter, which is
hmm
where you are right now. So it's so cool to be in our respective shops, connecting virtually. And I feel like that's actually really like very on brand for us because in all the time
Right.
that our shops have overlapped, we have yet to be able to physically
We're
get
like in
to
our
each
little
other's
bubbles in the
spaces.
Bronx, like reconnecting through the ethers of the internet.
Yes, yes, we're like 10 minutes away from each other, 15 minutes away from each other.
No.
But we have similar hours and obviously we're like our main or only employees
hmm
and so that means we're physically in our spaces at the same time and
A whole
aren't
lot. Yeah.
necessarily able to get away. So thank goodness for tech making it possible
Honestly.
for us to connect over this short distance
Yeah.
that we are. But let's talk a little bit about bread and butter for all of our listeners and watchers to better understand what that space was all about and how
Mhm.
she came to be and how she came to be in the Bronx because that's not where she started.
Yeah.
So, and I think 17 years or something like that, like
No, we just 10 years.
10 years, 10 years. I know it
10
was
years.
double digits. Um,
hmm
so 10 years being around, which is something to be incredibly proud of and a very long time in New York
Yeah.
City retail
hmm
as it goes. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Bread and Butter and where she was born.
Yes. So bread and butter. She's a Virgo born in Bushwick, Brooklyn
Mhm. Love a Virgo
in
and
2000 under a new moon. No,
powerful.
but really, yeah, like Bread and Butter started in September 2015. It started as an art project, honestly. I had been living on the West Coast. I'm originally born and raised in the Bronx and moved to San Francisco for college. I went to art school, and through that process, um, I was there for about 6 years. So I had a long journey of finding myself in this plant medicine work, doing a lot of like creative work with other artists and musicians. Um, a lot of my background in this work also comes from working in cannabis on the farm, like in the farming aspect throughout my time and beyond in San Francisco. So coming back to New York, I was trying to find creative ways and outlets to like connect and merge all these worlds that I had been exploring and really like diving deep into. And I didn't find that sort of space when I was looking around. So I decided we'll just have this, gallery opening, which is what, as an art student, what, I was used to how to gather people. I had other creative, friends who were musicians perform that evening. Two really close guy friends were starting a t-shirt brand, so they launched their brand that evening. I was making textiles and like sewing clothing at the time, and had a small apothecary with herbs that I had, grown and tended on this farm in Mendocino alongside cannabis. So there were these infused medicines that were coming in. I was bringing pre-rolls, like herbal pre-rolls with cannabis that like sparked different feelings and energies in folks. And it was this one night experience that I was like, oh, this will be cool. And everything I made had sold that evening. The party was a huge success. We had it at the Living Gallery, which is right under the J train on Broadway. And people from off the street came. It was like this really epic experience. And a week later, I was flying back to San Francisco, to Mendocino, to go work on the farm for another 2-3 months. So I had this like experience that was super expansive and surprising. And then I went and retreated to the woods for, a few months. And while I was on the farm, this was like year 5 of me being on the farm for like 2 to 3 months at a time. There were herbalists on the farm and people who were the land tenders. So I was having this really special experience, like, working with the cannabis plant, like having, I feel like a lot of herbalists or folks who work in plant medicine always say like, well, this plant that spoke to me, and cannabis was the first plant that like really spoke to me. So I was having this profound experience with it in this way, and working with these herbalists and learning about the like native, fauna and flora of Northern California, but also finding plants that I remembered from my grandma's garden here in the Bronx. And just like these ancestral webs started weaving in with this like new world of herbalism and spiritual experiences with plants. And when I returned back to New York, this was right before like the holiday season. I came back with a lot of like downloads and started creating more medicines I had started that season on the farm. And I started doing pop-ups. And I was like, let's just see where this goes. Like I was bartending on the side because like that's what a lot of creative folks do, So I was bartending.
Shout out to the bartenders.
Like
we all bartend at some point.
Right. Bartend, barista vibes. Like you working in some sort of, customer service industry, most likely. And I came back and I just like I dove in headfirst to these pop-up experiences because I started, folks who had walked into the party that day were like, oh, have you heard of Artisan Flea? And I was like, well, no. And then I went to Artisan Flea and they were like, oh yeah, you can have a booth here. And I was like, okay. So I was sort of just like intuitively following these breadcrumbs. And 10 years later, it's become my literal, like the work I've been doing, my life's work for the last decade. And Bread and Butter has been like this really beautiful journey where I think because I jumped in sort of like the fool card, like just like running on in, heart open, eyes open, just ready for an experience. I've been really open to that curiosity, and it's led me down this really beautiful path of, now I find myself in the Bronx. I had a brick and mortars throughout Brooklyn from 2017 until last year, because we've been in this space for a year now. Found myself back home uptown. I have done all sorts of initiations, certifications, went back to school for my master's program in transpersonal therapy with a focus on psychedelic medicine. I now work very closely with other farms in Puerto Rico, my like ancestral home. I do a lot of work around the act of remembrance and coming back to oneself by reaching through plant medicines and through experiences on the land, reaching back to our ancestors and creating these safe experiences and holding safe space for BIPOC folks to really be able to dive into these altered states of consciousness and, have a trusted guide. And again, like being in a space in the Bronx, being in New York, in, a time where there is so much like cultural erosion happening around us. I saw it happening in Brooklyn. I was probably, I'm a New Yorker, but I was like a wave of that, like a wave of newness coming to Flatbush, coming to Crown Heights. And I'm seeing that a lot, as a person from the Bronx, this cultural erosion happening, around us. And to be, again, like in my home borough, being able to do this work of preservation for my people, with my people, has been like really beautiful. And I guess a short way of condensing, a way of condensing 10 years.
No, like there's no way, right? And you probably couldn't, because when it comes to our businesses, they're our babies. So we could talk about them
Right.
really all day. And I really love how you, first of all, so many similarities in our stories in terms of the organic way in which our physical locations came to be. There are a handful of the Better Witches, the spiritual business clients that I have, that are wanting to open retail locations, and like they already know that that's their goal and that's what we're working on together. But for me, it didn't happen in from a place of like, I'm going to open a physical location. It really happened very accidentally, in the way that it all unfolded. And for me, the retail aspect, we offered retail here for about a year and a half, 2 years of the like 3.5 years that we've been here. We didn't originally have retail. We were more of an office for me to do tarot readings and Reiki. And then people looking for recommendations and being like, well, do you have that? Do you have that? Do you have that? I started being like, well, I should
Yes.
carry this and I should carry that. And I already made spiritual and medicinal items, and herbal medicines already. So it just sort of made sense to like add on top of that.
For sure.
And then in that journey, beginning to realize that there was more that we could do. We were formerly Bronx Witch headquarters, now we're Witchwork. And there was more that Witchwork could do as a truly dedicated co-working space. And that retail is great, but that our people don't necessarily need more things to buy. They need a better understanding of what to even do with these things or why to bother with them in the first place. And they need more opportunities for gathering, for community, for education, for experiences. And that started to really tie into my feeling as a native of this neighborhood, that third spaces are needed and a big part of like the solution moving forward. There are not enough places that are not clinics or grocery stores or liquor stores there, or housing. There are not enough places for gathering, for education, for building and creating things. And so that drives people out of the neighborhood who are the creators and the visionaries and the artists and the thinkers. And that contributes to that cultural erosion that you're talking about, when the people who are representing the culture feel like they have to leave where they're from in order to get their art seen or get support for what they're doing. And a co-working space, to me, is a solution to that, and a very forward thinking co-working space as well, something that's tech equipped and AI equipped, and a part of the future, and not sort of trying to catch up with others or with other areas. So it's really powerful for me to listen to you go on that same sort of journey of being a part of the neighborhood and really trying to tap into what is truly needed in that space. And it makes me want to ask you about retail specifically, because we do have, like I said, at least a handful of listeners that also want to have metaphysical shops or spiritual shops or healing centers, wellness centers. What are some of the things that you learned, or maybe things that you would have liked to know ahead of time about having a physical location as a spiritual practitioner? Because things have changed quite a bit in the landscape of retail in the last 10 years with online suppliers and, the Amazons of the world and the Temus of the world.
Yeah.
It has been challenging for retail to maintain. So,
Mhm.
what are some of the things you experienced in that journey that you would want to share with the next generation of metaphysical shop owners?
Something that I wish I had tended to sooner, like by the time I opened my first brick and mortar, I was 3 years into bread and butter. I was very clear that this was at, by year one, I was already doing this full time. So I knew that this was my work, my path, like what I was going towards. But I did not have a lot of business understanding, and I was a bit younger. I didn't necessarily have the patience to allow myself to catch up, to learn, to take a quick course in QuickBooks, to, you know, see what this could be like, to have an accountant. If you're opening a physical space, that means this is your business. This isn't something that you're doing on the side. This is something that you're really putting yourself into. You're putting your hard earned money, the time that we spend is really the most important thing and the priceless thing. But catching up when it comes time for taxes, and when it comes time for the goal with opening a brick and mortar is you're going to be busy. You're going to have, a demand and supply. So make sure that your supply does reach the demand and that you're prepared for that sort of growth. Throughout, I learned this on the fly, the hard way. A lot of the times I was catching up. To be honest, it wasn't with maybe until the last 3-4 years that I started really like, this is my accountant, this is my bookkeeper, but I was in a position to be able to finally do that because growth was coming in. But I think one of the most spiritual things I've done in this chosen lifetime has been operating a business, because it causes us to confront shadow aspects of ourselves,
Ooh,
targeting being seen. Number
yeah,
one, like, you have this dream, this product, this transmission that wants to come through and be shared to people. You have to allow yourself to be seen, which can be, for me, was I grappled a lot with that. I definitely walked the line between super like lone wolf, I could
right.
be in the cut,
I'm not
to,
here. Just come buy the candles.
yeah, to like hosting events with, you got to be able to put yourself out there and be willing to do that. Another thing is, coming from the background that I come from, I don't come from money. I don't come from a financially stable childhood or background. So I grappled with a lot of scarcity mentality, and thinking about, making sure to not tie my self-worth and value to this business and the way that it grows. And that has been the deepest work for me that I feel like in the last few years I've definitely been tending to in a different way, because I think right now we are seeing such a rise in spiritual work, spiritual entrepreneurship. There's a reason for it. We really do need this. Like, humanity really is in a major deficit of spirituality, and there are these beacons of light that are like awakening and remembering themselves and wanting to share that and impart that knowledge. But sometimes there's so much of it that there's this lack of discernment. Because there's so much of it, you may
Mm,
turn to the wrong place, or like
right.
the place that, so there is so much of it, but it's still a business. Like, you still have to like continue put yourself out there and like know that and trust that this place that it's coming from, and this want to have this space, this brick and mortar, this wellness space, this brand, this business, is from a true authentic space and not from what's coming around, from outside of you.
Yeah.
Because it'll take you right back into that shadow space. So I feel like if you're ready to do this work, like, it's going to be many layers of meeting yourself. And like, yeah, businessing is crazy. I mean, I'm sure you've had
Yeah.
many experiences like that where you have to confront your shadow.
Yeah, for sure. And it's I love that you mentioned that too, because I'm like, what are some of the challenges of retail? And I'm waiting for you to be like, tariffs and ordering from China. And you're
All
like,
that's
no.
figure outable. You
No.
could Google that real quick, like.
Yeah, yeah. The personal transformation and the personal work that you have to to do in order to build or create something is immense. And I think is something that you probably can never really prepare for, though I guess if you have some idea, like if you hear people like us saying like, yeah, no, that it's going to happen, then maybe in some way you're prepared for it. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was because of the full moon being in Scorpio or whatever it was, but for the last few weeks, this theme has been coming up so heavily with all of the Better Witches. Everyone who gets one-on-one coaching from me, it's been coming up in everyone's session, no matter where they are, if they're trying to open a physical location or not, if they've had their business for years, if they just started it yesterday. Everyone seems to be kind of collectively going through this process of what you're calling shadow work, which is recognizing those aspects of yourself that you've been taught to repress or that you ignore,
Mm-hmm.
that embarrass you, that you feel shame about, and confronting them head on, or at least acknowledging that they are there. Because creating a business is very much, I don't have children, but I think like having a child or conceiving a child. And the state that you are in is going to directly impact the state that unborn child is in. This
Mm-hmm.
idea that you have, this thing that you're birthing, if you are carrying scarcity mindset, if you are riddled with anxiety, if you are, we all have developed coping mechanisms to survive our, childhood trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
they are impacting the decisions that you make every day, and they will impact the decisions that you make in your business. So knowing that they're there, knowing that they're impacting you, and being able to like very consciously and intentionally make the decision of how they impact you in your business is really important.
Right.
And I would agree that like the technical things are figure outable, even if you don't have that background and you need to reach out
Mm-hmm.
to someone for education or get it somewhere. But the personal and internal work that you have to do in order to treat your business in a way that is based on like fact and practicality as opposed to emotions and fears and habits and patterns that you've developed, is huge and hugely important.
Mm-hmm. I think especially for folks like doing the work that we do, it is from a spiritual space. Like Brown Switch work, like you're talking about spirituality is in the name. You're reclaiming a name that was like, you know, demonized for so long. Like people are like witches, it's like there's a lot of this deep work in that spiritual section, even though it's a business, even though you still have to like, do taxes and you have to do all these things. So many of my teachers have reminded me that like the spiritual work is in those things, like the mundane or like the things that seem so earthly. So like why do we have taxes? I'm from another planet, another timeline, and it's like, but in this timeline, mommy, we got taxes to do, and then you got to
Yeah.
go count the inventory and you got to pay the rent. And it's like that's where these moments of shadow really are turning into light. Like we're being cracked open because you are
Mhm.
having to tend to these things that seem difficult and maybe bog you down, but it's like in order to fully express and share these transmissions that are coming in that you want to put out into the world, there have to be specific structures and ways that things are operating in this timeline that we're in this world that we're in. Like
Yeah.
you have to be able, willing, and ready to confront, meet, and like be head on with those things.
Very much so. And I feel like that in itself is a space where there's often a lot of work and shadow work that needs to be done just around the concept of having a business around your spiritual practices and becoming a business professional. The first time someone called me an entrepreneur, it was my Reiki teacher, and like the cringe experience that I had when he said that was like physical. I was just like, oh,
Really?
what? You know?
Why?
And we've been in existence at that point for a year because I had this feeling of like, no, 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 no. Entrepreneurs are money hungry capitalists that,
Mm,
build $1 billion businesses off of like slave labor and unethical practices. An entrepreneur is not somebody that's trying to hold community or heal people or do spiritual work.
Mm-hmm.
So when he first said that to me, it was like an insult. And the way that he operated for me was very non-entrepreneurial, even though he has a business and a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could email him and not get a response back for 3 months because he was like out in the woods for like a
I
thing.
feel
You know what
that.
I mean? Yeah,
I feel that.
And so I was like, oh, like
This is
entrepreneur, what do you mean? Like,
right.
like I'm a spiritual being over here. Um, and it took me a while to get really comfortable with that and even start using that terminology to refer to myself because it seemed
Yeah.
very counter to being a spiritual practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me some time to recognize that business is spiritual, that your business is literally a fractal of yourself. Like
Mm-hmm.
God creating humans, you are creating a new entity, and it's a very spiritual process. And beyond that, that there's also a reality component that every generation of witches comes into their world for that time frame. There's a reason that Alicia Kravitz is not existing in the 1800s. First of all, I
Mm-hmm.
would not have survived.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would not be
Yeah.
here. I can tell you that
They
much.
would not allow us to have these
We
conversations on the
No,
broadcast
no. An
anyways.
ancestor I would not have been because I would have not made it
Yeah. No, it's
to
real.
carry anything on, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But that I really am here for this time frame. And so my job or part of my job is not to like hide from this reality, to not hide from the country that I live in, the politics that impact me, the economy that I navigate in, but rather to fully lean into that and figure out how and why I've come here at this time and how to use the tools that this time gives me in order to make what I consider a positive impact in the world and on the future. And so I had to like really make peace with the idea that in order for me to serve my community, I have to build a business around it because I'm alive in a capitalist economy. There isn't
Mm-hmm.
anything, not that I
Period.
can't do anything about that, right? We can be trying to flip the table all we want, but also I have to get in the room where the table is. I have to get a seat at the table. And the way that I do that is by exchanging resources with people in exchange for the gifts that I have and the abilities that I have and the things that I can do for them so
Mm-hmm.
that I can literally afford to continue to do that. And so it took some internal work for me to be okay with the idea that I'm a business owner or a CEO or an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur, because those are words that don't feel very spiritual.
Yes. I resonate with that so much. For me, it was, I think because I came into this space as an artist, as a creative, and I felt like so much of my creative, like the downloads that would come in, or periods of deep creative practice, were tied to these moments that were like maybe traumatic, stressful, depressive. Like there's that idea of like the starving artist, or like, oh, you're creating work from the space of heartbreak. And so much of my early career was and felt very tied to that. So when it came time to pivot into this more spiritual work, as I was like in practice, like actively trying to work through these things, you know, like you mentioned, those other pieces start to seep in. And it was this lack of understanding worth, scarcity, having a lot of scarcity mentality, and realizing that my work, this funnel, this like conversation that I have with divine, with God, with my higher self, is not tied to a place of, you know, the starving artist or the artist who has to be going through some sort of deep transformative experience, and or that's the only space that I can create from. It's like, no, I can create from a space of deep connection, understanding myself in this deeply embodied space. And once I started finding that, flow and coming to myself in that way, then I was able to really understand and translate what that looked like into my business. And it is really hard. Like I did a lot of this on the fly in the beginning, and just like not really knowing what to do with the money when it was coming in. Like, okay, I have a bank account. Also, some of my work really lived in the, underground space, the legacy world. So there was a lot of that like tied in with like, guilt and like secrecy and this work that's like deeply spiritual and understanding the layers of, like you said, if we were doing this in the 1800s, maybe we were doing this in the 1800s. And there's a reason that we're back in this timeline to like allow this to really manifest and to understand how to walk between both worlds, as I think spiritual beings do. Like, we're constantly in the process of walking between the veil, and on the veil on this side is business structure, and like I've also got like 7 Capricorn planets in my chart. So I'm all about the structure so I came into this world with the stars aligned, and then there's the other side where we're walking, where it's very ethereal and we're, feeling the oneness and the immensity of it all. But then you have to come back. So it really is this, yeah, wow, what an experience. I'm gonna definitely want to find a tangent, but
Yeah, no, no,
you
no.
feel me.
I definitely do. And that brings me to what I wanted to ask you about next, which is about like those next chapters then. Like as you respond to where you're being led and where you're being guided, sometimes it isn't always in the direction that you think things are going to go. The
Mhm.
different, I call it pivots, that I have made, I think are really born out of a deep desire to see something through, but also a knowing that comes from like genuinely knowing that you're walking in your purpose. And I
Mhm.
do think that that can be a place where we see practitioners maybe start and then fizzle out, because maybe that knowing wasn't really there. Maybe there was a assumption made. I think especially COVID gave us a lot of opportunities for people to lean in to their spiritual
Mhm.
practices, whereas before they maybe didn't have the time. But I think it also created a misconception for some that spiritual work is like an easy way to make a living, and that this would be a way to get away from the manager that you hate, or no longer be able to be required to be at work when you really want to be vacationing, right? And it's really quite the opposite. As entrepreneurs, it doesn't matter that your work is spiritual. You typically don't have that time freedom and that financial freedom in the beginning. You actually
Mhm.
have far less than you would in a regular job, with the goal being that one day that begins to shift and it goes in the other direction. But it can be many years before that ever happens, and you don't always know. So I know that Bread and Butter is going no longer being open, to the public as a shopping location.
Mhm.
What was that like? Because I imagine it may not have been what you had expected, moving in just a year ago, that a year later you'd be pivoting already. So what were some of the factors that motivated you to decide it was time to stop open to the public shopping, and how is that a part of like what you're being pulled into doing next?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. No, I never. Last year when I moved into the space, I had no intention of closing Bread and Butter. I have no intention of shifting or pivoting in this way. Um, but spirit do what spirit do, and
Sure do.
this last year, well, my life, I think my daughter is now a year and a half old, and my life really changed when I had my baby, as it does as a parent. Um, but it was another opportunity for me to slow down, where the pandemic was the first opportunity. And I feel like that distance and pace allowed me to like see myself more clearly and begin to sort of take some space between myself and my business, and realizing that, we're separate entities. The period of motherhood and like early postpartum, that slowdown felt like me realigning my purpose, because although I had taken some space from work, I was still wearing all the hats. I was still, doing the most every hour that wasn't everything like Bread and Butter still consumes me very much. Although I was now allowing myself to like not be in the physical space, as often. I was allowing myself to be on vacation. I was still working. Like, don't get it twisted, even because I wasn't there. I was on my computer somewhere, still
Right.
working. So, that allowed me to create that space. But when coming to the Bronx felt very intuitive also, like I had just been wanting to be closer to home. I just kept feeling these thoughts of home and like, I don't know, the signs were really pointing me here. So that was step one, coming to the Bronx. It's been a really beautiful year. At the end of last year, I was going through some like spiritual shifts, going through different initiations, and things started to feel different in this space because bread and butter is such a transmission. The work is coming through lived experiences, one-on-ones that I have with community and clients. Things started to shift for me internally, and I felt like things were incongruent. Like the way that I was like operating and working with bread and butter wasn't really aligning with my home life, with my this new version of me. The version of me that started bread and butter at 27 was very different, had different ideas and intentions, I guess, going into it. And over time and decisions led me to really having an evening here in the studio. I had been doing a lot of work with the Orisha Elekwa, who, opens the doorways, creates these thresholds for us to choose to cross or not. And I was coming to this threshold where this literal download popped in, like, of burning it all down, like burning it all down. And I was like, I'll burn it all down and do it again better, like with a stronger foundation. And I never thought that before. I never thought about burning bread and butter down, closing bread and butter. It like was going through a slow period, but I was like, I've survived slow periods. That's the ebbs and flow of retail, and
Right.
that's just what it is. But this slowdown felt more deliberate, more like just there was no way that I couldn't not see what was happening. And this download, this drop in felt very abrupt, but very like timely at the same time. And I remember I was closing up the studio, turning off the candles, and I was driving home. There was no music on, no nothing. I was just sitting with that thought of like, maybe all these doors being closed, windows being closed, and I'm so stubborn. I'm like carving, trying to carve another door. And spirit is just like, just burn it down. The community's not going anywhere. That's one thing that's been a driving force throughout even having a physical location all these years. It can be very difficult. It can be hard, especially in New York with rent, with, just the maintenance and upkeep of a physical space, with staff, with your own hours of the day. There's so many things, but the thing that has kept me going has been community, and like this long-standing community that I've had over these 10 years who come from deep as Brooklyn up to the Bronx for ceremony.
Yeah.
People from the Bronx who were going to deep as Brooklyn for ceremony. And it's like, they're still here. And I really had to allow myself to trust that me allowing this to fall away and to like, we're literally having a burn this at the end of this week, a bread and butter burn, but literally allowing it to burn, to become fertile soil for this new project that had been on my heart for a while, that I thought was going to be birthed through bread and butter. Had realized that it's really its own journey, its own project, this new manifestation, this new expression that wants to come through. So it has been 6-7 months of me doing the like breaking things down systematically, spiritually, like going as far as to closing out that LLC, like having this spiritual burn, doing the cleanses, the limpiezas, like doing the offerings. Like it really is this closing of a decade, of a chapter of my life. And I've been in this space of doing things differently this time around, like starting the business, like we were saying, with that structure of a business. I didn't start bread and butter on much of a structure. It got built along the way. But Yabisi is our new brand, and Yabisi is coming in already with the bookkeepers in place and the accountants and the this and the that, and the products are ready. The staff is here. Like everything is coming together from this more rooted, grounded, stable space that I feel is going to be able to give me the longevity and the space to grow, the like time. And it it feels good.
Yeah.
And
I always say that witches do it better. And then when people are like, what's it? I'm like, just anything. Because when you make decisions from a spirit led place, as horrifying as they might be, it's very different from being like random about
Mhm.
it. Because I had a very similar experience with thinking that growing the retail here was the avenue to getting to like the final destination or having the impact that I know I'm here to have and that I intend to have on the world. And, spirit being like, nope, that was just a detour through some things. There were
Yeah.
things you needed to learn. There were relationships you needed to gain. There were skills that you needed to have. But this was not the final form. And this wasn't even like the road to getting there. It was just sort of like a
Mhm.
pit stop of learning for you to do.
Right.
And you're a perfect example that like that journey can be a 10-year journey, and all of it come together to take you in a completely different direction. And I think without that understanding that your steps are being guided, you would it would be easy to be really just like disappointed and devastated and look at it in a very negative way and be like, oh my goodness, I was building these things. And I definitely went through a period of mourning. It wasn't like I woke
Mhm.
up and was like, yay, I'm shutting down this
Oh, yeah, no,
operation I've been pouring my whole heart and soul into
I'm
for the
sure.
last 2 years and that I make, several $1,000s on a month. Like, yay. Like, no, it was
Yeah.
very horrifying. But it was also clear to me that the message that I was being given was this is exactly what has to be done.
Mhm.
You're going to take those wholesale accounts. You're going to take those relationships you made. You're going to take the knowledge that you got, and this may come back in a different way or not. Maybe you're doing something else completely, but there was purpose behind this. And
Mhm.
now, as much sadness as there may be to let that go, there's a reason for that. Um, and that's been very helpful because I think otherwise it would be really easy to, like you said, keep carving and keep
Mhm.
plugging ahead and being like, no, I put all of this into this retail shop. We are going to keep selling candles. We are going to keep
Right.
doing this. I refuse to let it go. And then that could be devastating long term. The
Yeah.
longer you try to make something that's, not in alignment happen, the longer you're preventing your or delaying your blessings in your next step. So I
Very much so.
totally understand that it's not an easy decision at all, but it is one that, because it's spirit led, is a little, I think you're able to find the joy faster.
Yeah, like the surrender to it. I remember a few years ago, one of my elders talking to me about surrender because I've had a really hard time with that. I could definitely be like a little like neurotic in that sense.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, oh no, I had a
'Cause you're a
plan. Like
boss.
I'm seeing
Yeah.
it through. Like, So I've had a hard time throughout this 10-year career of like surrendering and allowing spirit to come in those ways. Because sometimes our plan is not for our greatest good. It's only what our human mind and eyes could conjure up. So this shift, I felt a sweetness to the surrender and I allowed it to go more gently, not gently at all. Like I still fought in moments. I still went through periods where I was like, oh my God, wait, this is fucking crazy. Like, this is
Right.
my business, my brand. Like, I have a family, I have a home, like, I have things to set up. And who knows, like, will the financial gain be the same on the other end? Like, oh my God, is this a mistake? I'm kind of starting from scratch with a new name. Like,
Yeah.
I'm starting over. And like, what is that? There's fear in that. There had been fear in that. And allowing myself to just go with the flow. Like once I like said it out loud, I said it to my husband. I remember my mom spoke to me. She's been a big like help throughout these years too, talking to my staff about that. And I remember talking to my staff and they were like, okay, but what do we do? I'm like, well, we're going to have to fade out. It's going to take a while. I'm going to start painting though and like getting back into an art practice because I got to go see what's good. And literally just like took the next month or so to just create art and that's my meditation. That's my space of connecting with God and, source and allowing what needs to come in and surrendering to that. Where before I'd be looking up and like trying to prepare plans and like doing some research and seeing what's the best way to go about A, B, and C. And it's like this time I just allowed myself to tap in a bit more and allow myself to just again surrender. Like I just imagine myself like floating down the river without trying to fight the current, but like floating down the river and just like going for the ride and being like, if this dropped in as abruptly as it did and I felt it, like I remember saying it out, like thinking it and saying it out loud and feeling my shoulders sort of like fall down and realizing like, okay, my body really needs this. Like this pivot is, whether it is as successful as bread and butter had been, whatever it is, it's different and it's the journey that I'm supposed to go on. And maybe BC is not where I end up in another 10 years, but the path feels, as I'm stepping on it, I don't see it, which is kind of exciting. Like I don't see, like the whole picture isn't filled in yet, but I'm like, all right, but we're walking. And, going back to that experience that I had with Elegua and having that, like this download drop in that I know was like given to me from him was, just cross the threshold and like everything will be just as it needs to be, whatever that is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the open roads, I want to get into a little bit about what's next for you guys, what UBC is all about, and talk a little bit about plant medicine, as there are quite a number of better witches that also facilitate that as well. And I have some questions about that. But I think now is definitely a good time for a quick break. So for all my witches, if you want to run to the little witches room, now is the time to do so. And while you all are refilling your teas and getting ready for more conversation with Lynsey, I want to talk straight to my witchpreneurs out there, okay? I want to talk to my boss witches. If you have a witchy business, a product, or a service that you want to get in front of the thousands of witches that tune into this show, then an ad spot is the best way to do that. We still have spots available for season 4. Season 4 will drop on podcast platforms in just a couple of weeks. And so if you want to share what you are all about with our growing community, then getting an ad spot in one of season 4's episodes is the way to do that. And you can do that right now. The Better Witch podcast has been downloaded over 16,000 times. We're very proud of that. And we are very grateful for all of the love that you guys have been showing us. And if you are a boss witch out there, I want you to ask yourself, what would you do with 16,000 new followers, customers, or clients? It would be hugely impactful, I bet. So you're going to want to get in now. The details for getting an ad spot are down in the description of this video. So definitely make sure you grab one of those and share your spiritual gifts, your spiritual business with the world. They need to hear from you. All right. So we are back again with Lynsey of Bread and Butter and YaBC, and we're talking about spiritual entrepreneurship, connecting with community, what it's like to have a brick and mortar location, what it's like to have retail in that brick and mortar location in this very changing world. And just as we went into the break, we started to talk about some of the shifts and the pivots that we go through as spiritual practitioners and how that helps us to navigate making pivots and changes in our business so that we don't give up, that we evolve and we move into the next thing when it's time. So I wanted to talk about YaBC and I wanted to talk about plant medicine in particular. We have a few shamans and practitioners that work with plant medicine that get one-on-one coaching from me, the different better witches in this community. And one of the challenges that comes up in that space is the fact that some of these plant medicines are controlled substances. Some of them might be difficult to obtain in the US, or there might be questions about authenticity. There might be questions about sourcing from indigenous sources, from legitimate sources. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about that because all the plant medicine that I work with, making my organic medicinal teas, smoke blends, and yoni steams, are non-controlled plants. And so for the healers that are working with cannabis, psilocybin, ayahuasca, kambo, these different types of medicines, what has it been like building a community or getting medicine to the people that need it when you may not necessarily be able to stand on a mountaintop and say, come and get it. Here's this thing that I'm offering for you. What has that been like, and what have you learned about navigating the plant medicine space as an entrepreneur?
Mhm. Well, I came into the space with a legacy background already. Having been living in California, I had this really special experience working on a cannabis farm. So I was already growing and tending to the plants that I was then, bringing when I was back in New York.
Mhm.
Um, and it still is, even for the legal market. Well, not for legal market, but for a lot of the, I want to say not necessarily with cannabis, because that legal market is, they're doing their thing right now. But for folks who are like walking into the space of psychedelic medicines like mushrooms, ketamine, like there's a lot of gray areas still happening. But back in 2015, um, the experiences that I were offering would just include these sorts of medicines at first. And I've seen that in DC. I've seen that in some cities where there's sort of a loophole where you're not necessarily buying these medicines. You're purchasing a ticket that comes with these free gifts, or you're purchasing this experience that comes with a gift bag that has the medicines that you'll be working with through this ceremony or this experience. Um, so that was a way that I was able to frame that for all of time, I guess. um, but it's true in the sense of how I'm able to promote my business, how I'm able to share what I do, or be able to like get that on a larger scale. And that wasn't necessarily ever my plan, because I understand that because cannabis was the first plant that spoke to me, that's a plant that we're already doing so much work to decolonize and destigmatize. So I already knew that the work that I am meant to share in this lifetime isn't necessarily going to be one that can be like a goop, or some sort of like more mainstream. There is this level of legacy and underground vibe and experience that my work gives, and I really honor that, especially now, working with, I personally only work with cannabis and psychedelic mushrooms and wachuma, and these are all plants that I grow and can grow and have taught folks how to grow themselves. These are medicines that are more accessible than, say, ayahuasca or, peyote, that's like very sacred and for like specific. It's easier to grow and obtain spores to grow your own mushrooms. You can get seeds, you can buy seedlings, small plants of cannabis, and be able to have that experience on your own. So that's very much been my experience over this last decade, where over the pandemic, I used to work with someone who still grows mushrooms. Like, he has his own mushroom farm, but over the pandemic, I was able to learn how to grow my own mushrooms. So the microdose experiences that we had with bread and butter were from my own mushroom babies. The cannabis has always been, I've partnered with a farm in Detroit that I've known these guys since our inception on the farm together. So these have been very close relationships. And I think that with my work in particular, and the way that I've operated with like small ceremonies and being able to make medicines for individual, like for what they're walking through in that moment or working through in that moment, it's been really special that I've been able to be the person cultivating those medicines, or I'm friends with or acquaintances with the person who is growing the medicine. So it is very close circle, not close circle, but community. It's very community. I met people through people, and that's sort of how the legacy and underground world has been for all of time. So there had been moments of contraction with that for myself, because there were moments where it's like, oh, well, maybe why can't my work be shown here or there? And it's like, because of the nature of my work, because of the destigmatization work, the decolonization work that I'm doing, it's the world isn't ready for a lot of those things. But the people who need it have been able to find us. Bread and Butter over these 10 years has grown truly from word of mouth. And I feel like that's been such a huge blessing, because that keeps the work sacred. It keeps it intimate. It keeps it very intentional. and it has kept it safe all these years. Like I really pride myself in this space on being a safe space for people to allow these experiences to occur and know that, you're good. I got you. Like, I'm a trained medicine person, from the clinical aspect to the shamanistic and spiritual aspect. So, you are covered in that way. And the folks who are facilitating, if it's not me that's facilitating, is our space, it is through close relationship. I've either learned from them or they've been recommended from someone that I've worked with. So it's, yeah, it is a really interesting space. And I know that, you mentioned some of your community and clients who are also in a similar space. That is probably the most difficult aspect of it is, you know, number one, the intention, like the where the medicine is coming from, the sourcing, but number two, like the way in which you share this work. And I feel like every person, medicine person, experience with their particular master plant, they know why the medicine is asking to speak through them. They know how the medicine wants to speak through them. So being able to find and allow it to go slowly, as all integrating practices, we need to start small, allow like that, maybe it's one ceremony or experience where you invite close friends or like, acquaintances or people who you can allow to have a trusted circle. And after they have an experience, they can then share that with other people. And that's how it grows, I think. And that's, at least for me, that's like been the path that I found my way through.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
I really feel like some of the inability to maybe, really broadcast the work that is being done around psychedelics and plant medicine is a good thing. We can kind of see what it's like when things are available in mass, or there's mass consumption of something that could have a really positive and beautiful impact on our lives, and then accidentally or unfortunately become recreationally used or a dependent, and that intention and healing aspect be lost, when not being utilized in spaces where there's that sacredness is being maintained and that
Mhm.
intention is being maintained. And so something I've been talking about with better witches who facilitate plant medicine is that word of mouth really is going to be one of your best angles. And so knowing that, it also means that perhaps there's other things that you offer that you can share more publicly, or
Mhm.
other work that you do that you can share more publicly, because being kind of at the mercy of word of mouth can be difficult for marketing a business, or being able to depend on um knowing how many people are going to come to you in a period of time, et cetera, because we do have the financial component. You're sourcing materials, those that needs to be covered, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
um, and I think that there are ways to combine that with like practical modern day tools and concepts. So, if word of mouth is what your business relies on heavily, then maybe you have some type of a referral program. Maybe there is some type of incentive that you offer to people for sharing you and what you offer with others. You might create some type of membership, or bundle where folks can have ongoing ceremonies or regular access to you, and the things that you offer, so that you can have income that you can forecast or predict, and things like that. So you can still, I think, grow a thriving business, even if word of mouth is one of the marketing tools that is available to you.
Mhm.
And you can still make that happen by utilizing some modern concepts and networking as well. And that kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier about the
Mhm.
fear of being seen, being afraid to put yourself out there and speak, confidently about what you do and what
Mhm.
you contribute to this world. I find that to be in, I don't want to call it an issue, but like it comes up a lot, because I'm a huge advocate for networking. I feel really strongly that the services, the products, anything in the spiritual and wellness realm, many times people make the decision to go with someone over somebody else because of energy, because of
Mm-hmm.
vibes, because of alignment with you. And if people are not seeing you, if they're not meeting you, if they don't know who you are, then that is going to be missing. And you kind of want them to have that, especially if you take what you do seriously. You want them to care who they
Of
are,
course.
taking medicine with or in ceremony with. And so the only way for people to really know that you have that sort of integrity, that you have that focus on safety, that you create warm and welcoming spaces, really is to interact with you. So it sounds very
Mm-hmm.
buttoned up and stuffy, like, oh, networking. But it's
It's more chill than
actually,
that. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, spiritual networking, not everybody's like in a suit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The spaces are more vibey a lot of times, but the intention is the same. To be the face of what you offer and let people see you, see who
Yeah.
you are, and see your genuineness, see your intentions, see your purpose, and all of that good stuff. And speaking of letting people see you, I wonder, when it comes to plant medicine in particular, what are some of the things that you've had to take into consideration when it comes to finding like aligned clients? Because word of mouth can, I guess, any type of advertisement, you never know where it's going to go and who's going to
Mm-hmm.
hear about it and who's going to find out about it. So, what's it been like for you to make sure that the people coming to you are as intentional as you are, and that there aren't perhaps maybe red flags or things to be concerned about in terms of someone's intentions or their usage of the medicine that you're making available?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So for with bread and butter, we have different types of ceremonies. So one that was more open to community, where folks can just like purchase a ticket, those would not include high doses of plant medicine. So it'd be very microdose level, more of an experience, sort of like an entry point, because I feel like every medicine person has other tools and modalities that work alongside the medicine. So that's
Mhm.
also, I think, a good entry point for folks who are wanting to get their name out without, giving people these plant medicines. It's showing an aspect of your work on a more generalized level. So for me, I work a lot with sound and plant medicine. So I'd have open spaces where folks can buy a ticket. So sometimes it's familiar faces, sometimes it's folks I've never met before who just saw my ad on Instagram, or they heard of me. There's so many different avenues that people can come through. But when I'm working intentionally, like doing a mushroom ceremony, that's going to be, 6 to 8 hours long, I'm having an intake call with my client, with the person who's going to be the journeyer, let's say. And I don't offer space for more than 6 people. Oftentimes, when I do these sorts of ceremonies, it's groups of people who are coming together. So, a group of friends or couple, or you know I've done like work retreats for people who are in creative spaces, and I have an intake call which with each of them. I have an extensive background in clinical herbalism and pharmacology and psychedelic therapy, so I'm having this intake form from a level of contraindications. Is this medicine good for you, like on a physical level, with medicines that you're taking, with mental health past histories, etc. So that's level one. You want to make sure of the safety of whoever you're going to be with and having that understanding. Then it's really a vibe check too. Like, I'm not the practitioner for everyone, and that's just what it is. So if I don't feel that it's a right fit, I'm honest with the person. I've had that experience in the past where I may not have been the right person to facilitate them on this journey that they're wanting guidance on, but I've been in this world long enough where maybe I can, refer you to another plant medicine worker that I know that I think you guys would be very aligned. This definitely feels like more of the experience that you're looking for. They definitely offer that, which is a beautiful way of cross pollination, I call it. Like, I feel like, even with the type of work we do, I may not have something, but Bronx BetterWitch may have that over there.
Yeah.
So that's important. But yeah, I think that check-in beforehand is crucial because, and again, if you're working with sacred earth medicines, even if it's cacao, which is not necessarily a psychoactive substance, it's extremely heart opening. Things may come up for people. They could be, in a period of grief from losing a loved one, or a period of major transition where their life before as they know it is no longer, and they're embarking this new, there are very sensitive points that people could be coming to you on their journey, and you need to be able to know that, understand that, and to be able to know that you can hold space for that type of transcendent experience that's happening. Being a facilitator of sacred earth medicine, you're really just holding space, like you're holding the vibration and the frequency for people as they're on these different journeys. So me personally, I won't go over a certain amount of people because I'm aware of my ability, sensitivity, capability, and of course the safety reasons. Like you want to make sure the people that are coming in to sit with you, you're going to be able to sit, they're going to be able to sit for 6 to 8 hours for this sacred experience. I have a good friend who's a Kambo practitioner, and that's a sacred earth medicine. It's non-psychoactive, but you have to go through extensive training and initiation for this. And that is like, it's a really intense purgative. So you're vomiting, you're going to the bathroom, you're consuming large amounts of water, and it's removing these, like, yes, spiritual blockages, but like physical ailments from your body as well. You have to know that the person that you're sitting with doesn't have, restrictions or like a bit, there's so many things. So you have to be able to ask questions. And I think having had done this work for as long as I have seen people come into the plant medicine space from a place, an open-hearted space and a really well-intentioned space of wanting to share this medicine. But you have to think of the safety of others, number one. So if you were trained by an elder or another facilitator, you're going to know this off the rip. But I want to say this not just for the facilitators, because it's up to the person who is looking for the journey to be discerning and to be able to ask those questions. Like, let's say you have asthma. I'm a person who's asthmatic, and some ceremonies have brought up difficulty of breathing for me because of, that's a place that grief is held. That's a place that fear is held. So you have to be able to express that or be able to say that to a person. They should be asking you those things. So be discerning of who's asking you, for safety reasons, the questions that they're asking you. You have to be able to be upfront with that too, because going into these altered states of consciousness, you may not even know what's going to come up. I've had journeys with folks who are, pulling memories up from childhood that were difficult to go through again or remember. So being able to hold that type of space, it's really sensitive work. I do not think it's for everyone. And I don't think that this type of healing is for everyone either. I've had folks come to me and want specific kinds of journeys, and I'm like, after I because of my background in therapy work, like I'm having a few meetings with folks, we're checking in, there are specific questions I'm asking, and I've had to tell people, like, this may not be the right time, let's revisit this in 3-4 months, like let's check in again. And maybe they went and did the medicine with someone else and other experiences, but for coming from a space ethically, like as from an ethical standpoint, and just like genuine care for the other person, I'm not going to put someone through a deep medicinal journey who's going through an experience where that rupture in reality can really shift them in a way that may be harder to come back from and integrate from than time. Just good old-fashioned time can be a great healer as well.
Right. And, and then that begins to bring up even questions of mental health. This is May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And that's a whole other level as spiritual practitioners. We're all in different spots on the spectrum of mental health, right? And that is a whole nother layer to kind of navigate, both for clients, potential clients, but also for yourself. This month, maybe you'll get a chance to come to this as well. This month on May 30th, we're having our next Spiritual Small Business Networking Mixer, and we're going to have Jennifer Ochiaga, who's a licensed therapist, here to talk about mental health preservation as solopreneurs and spiritual practitioners. What does it look like maybe to evaluate that a little bit? Obviously, not potentially to the level of diagnosing anyone with anything, but being able to recognize signs of some challenges in mental health, both in yourself and in potential clients, and how we can navigate that. So, if you're free, I hope you'll be able to stop
That
by
sounds
and
awesome.
join us at Witchwork. We do a spiritual small business networking mixer every 2 months on the last Friday of the month from 4 to 7, and we have wine and food. Um,
Love.
and we come together, we get to know each other, and we usually have a presentation on a topic that's pertinent to us all. So I definitely hope you'll be able to join us there. That'd be so
Yeah.
great to have you here. And in terms of your next chapter, before we head out for this evening, why don't you share with us what we can be looking forward to next with the
Mhm.
obesity? How can we interact with your next chapter, and how can we connect with you?
Thank you. Yeah, so this coming Friday, May 23rd, we're having our I'm calling it the death and rebirth party. We're having a
Love it.
literal burn at the Bronx Brewery in their backyard. So we're having a burn where we're doing like a release ritual, and we're welcoming Yabisi. So it's also the opening for the Botanica aspect of Yabisi. But yeah, the evening will be great. We're going to have a bomba. We're going to have Uptown Final Supreme, DJ Bembona, a couple vendors. Um, yeah, if that's one thing, bread and butter, we're gonna throw a party.
Yes.
But yeah, so the 23rd will also be the opening of our Botanica. It's Botanica Yabisi. And this, I'm like looking over here because I'm looking at the shelves where like we've been labeling for this Friday. Um, the products are definitely a culmination of my work in the medicine space over the last 15 years. And you can expect everything from our smoke blends that are now steep or smoke blends. You can use them as a tea. You can use them to smoke up with your favorite herb or burn it as a ancestral or altar offering. The idea is that we are weaving in ancestral practices into everyday life. Um, and something that I'm really excited about is our School of Ancestral Spiritualism that's opening this late fall. Something that I've learned over the last decade with bread and butter is that, even the questions and the conversations we're having now around plant medicine work, where to dive into that specifically from the lens of like the Caribbean diaspora, from the lens of a person who is a practitioner of Ifa and Candomblé. So it's very rooted in the Orisha. It's very rooted in reconnecting with the land. We're going to have a 1 year long program that's 3 levels. The first level is the fundamentals, like the foundations, working with the altar, learning how to do platica, learning some early diagnostic work. We're gonna have great like co-facilitators and faculty come in, that I'm really excited about. Like once a month, we'll have a new teacher. The second level is all about diagnostics, where you're learning how to do candle readings, egg cleansings, going deeper into sound therapy, into vibrational medicine. And then the third level, I'm going to be inviting folks who like are wanting to continue, where we'll be doing sort of like winding up of medicine practice, but studying 4 different master plants. So we'll be working with tobacco, cannabis, mushroom medicine, and wachuma, and learning how to facilitate your own medicine ceremony for folks rooted in this space of ethics, care, ancestral practices, learning from these indigenous elders and medicine folks. And we'll be going to different sacred sites throughout Puerto Rico and Brazil. So the LBC is definitely weaving in much of bread and butter, but much of my personal um, practice. And we'll still have our physical location here in the Bronx. We'll be open monthly for some sort of community gathering, whether it's a plant medicine ceremony or an educational experience. But yeah, we're online. We're Yabisi underscore NYC as of Friday. And yeah, I'm really excited for this new chapter.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so excited for you as well. This sounds like a beautiful next step, and a marriage of all that you've worked on over these years, and the next step of what your community needs from you. So I think that is so incredible. I'm really looking forward to being involved and seeing all the growth. You have my support, and if
Thank
Witchwork
you.
can help in any way, definitely let us know. I want all of you guys to head to ubc.com or ubc_NYC on Instagram. Check them out, follow the journey, be a part of it. These practices are so, so, so important. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience, because hashtag witches helping witches. So I'm so
You know,
grateful to have you share experience with everyone so we can learn from everything that you have gone through. So thank you so much, my dear.
thank you so much, Ali. I appreciated this and enjoyed chatting with you. It was great.
Yes, so great to see you.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Thank you, witches, for tuning in to another episode of the Better Witch podcast. I've been your host, Ali Kravitz. For spiritual business tips, follow me on Instagram and Threads at Bronx Witch. And you can find links to my classes, coaching programs, and more in the description of this episode. Remember, witches, when we know better, we witch better. See you in the next one. Blessed be.